Hey, good morning, Ben with Studio on the Lake. There's the fire set up. It's a couple days before New Year's. This is the second in the series that I said that I was going to do this in two, and it's turned out to be three, and I have to apologize for that. Here's a loon that I kept. I carved probably 5 years ago, and I'm showing you that just as a preview, I guess, or whatever. Here, what we're going to come up with. There's a basswood chunk that came out of the shed out there. Actually, it came out of the studio of the roof right above us there. I don't necessarily use a pattern. I've made so many of these. Each one turns out to be a little bit different. Each have unique characteristics. This one it turned out to be just a hair shorter than normal, and I was concerned the body might be too short, but it's turned out fine. The head you saw in the first video there, I haven't done too much more to it than that. I drew the quick pattern on there, ran over the bandsaw, sawed that thing. Like I said, I set most of these up. These blanks, I cut them for this particular bird because this is the most popular one that I carve, and that does the best for me. And I actually enjoy doing these. They're a little different styling on these as we go through here. These videos are fairly heavy editing. Each of these sessions is probably a 4 to 5 hour session of carving. I skip a lot of steps in there. So if there's anything that you want to see or any questions you have, please be sure to put those in the comments down there, and I'll go back and pick those up. You can see I've kind of roughed the outside of that down. I positioned the head where I think I'm going to like it. Sometimes I stick the head up in the air like the loon is calling, other times down, not necessarily tucked, but a little bit further down. I've mentioned in other carvings, if you haven't gone back or looked around the channel, I'll talk about the basics of carving and how I approach it. And one of the things I do is I use a burning pin a lot of times for a stop cut. I'm too lazy. You can take a knife or a chisel and slowly go around the circle of that neck there. Cut that down maybe 1/8 of an inch. But I find that I can run a burning pin pretty hot and get the same thing. You can see right there I blasted through the edge of my stop cut. So now I'm going back and putting a stop cut in with the chisel. Not the best use of a chisel. I use that little rubber mallet for pretty much everything. I don't like to tear. I don't like a lot of the harder mallets. They just seem a little harsh to me, and that little rubber mallet does the trick and doesn't do the damage on the handles. Now I do some timber framing out at the woodlot and various different things, and I have these monster chisels, and with those I'll use a piece of wood as a mallet. I'll just make a mallet out of wood and go until that handle is destroyed. But those chisels have socket heads in them, and once you've destroyed the handle, you can go ahead and quickly carve, or if you're really dedicated, turn a new handle, stick it in the socket, and go to town, and you're not worried about destroying it. These are actually set with ferrules and the whole 9 yards, and a little bit more problematic when you're getting ready to replace a handle. I might show you that in a video one of these days. It is cold outside. We had a cold spell here. It's below zero. I do run that big pot-bellied stove. That is the only heat that I have out in the studio. But it's nice and comfortable. I have a TV up on the other side that's tuned to something ridiculous like Netflix, playing Star Wars or something, or Star Trek or something in the background. I don't pay attention to it. It's just background noise. I found that it's easier to do a voiceover than it is to compete with the tool sounds and the ambient sounds in the studio. part of the pleasure of carving is to have music in the background, or some mindless TV show going on while I spend 4 or 5 hours carving. There's the neck set down into the basswood blank. This is a 5-minute 2-part epoxy. I use the stuff by the ton. I really like it. It doesn't necessarily set in 5 minutes. It's more like 10 or 15 minutes. But I don't, I can live with that amount of time. And it gives a really permanent connection to that. In the old days, I would put a screw up through the bottom to secure the neck. That's just not necessary with this epoxy. You can see I mix it with whatever I pull off the floor there. One of these days, actually clean the studio. It's a lot more fun to carve than it is to suck up sawdust and wood chips. I grab them by the handful and use them to start fire. And at some point, I have to break down and clean the studio. No clamp necessary for that. It kind of has a little bit of a press fit going down in there. I'll try to fill the holes with the epoxy, and then if I end up with any gaps, I can come back later with a 2-part epoxy that I use to set the eyes and fill that in, and that stuff seems to carve fairly well. So there it is, set for about 10 minutes there, and then we'll go on to the next portion of that. I like to set the heads before I do the carving on the body. I will get the rough outline of the body where I want to. I do that with most of the decoys. That way I can kind of get the pose that I'm going for. You can see I've removed more wood and roughly shaped the top portion of that. You can see how that comes off. That's chainsawed right on the bottom and dried. This piece has a couple of cracks in them. They're not going to get any worse. This stuff's been seasoning up there for about 3 years, but it really doesn't hurt these, in my opinion, to have a crack in the front of it, or even the tail. But typically they'll crack where my left hand is, right there. I try to split these so they don't, and I don't have the center and the pith in there. There's a micro carver. There's one of two from PGL Enterprises over in Minnesota there. Kind of an obscure deal, but I love these. The first one I've got 20 plus years ago. The second one a few years ago for Christmas, just before I sent my original one back to him to get new bearings. If you look real close there, right about where I'm working right in there is a soft spot, so a little lighter feather touch. A piece of soft wood in this. I've mentioned before, this isn't a competition piece, and therefore I don't need as high quality of wood. I'll leave the better quality of wood for other projects where it's required. This is going to get all contoured and detoured, stoned, and then burned. Well, not necessarily burned on this one. I leave a lot of the burning out. Burning is basically done in the back, on the tail feathers and the end of the wings. Here you can see what I'm drawing in is kind of a flow line. Every time I do the power carving and go in there, I'm usually working with the flow line. And that's what I'm drawing in right there with the pen. I suppose I should have used the red so you could see it a little bit better. It's pretty scientific the way I do that. I just kind of scribble on it till it looks right. I mentioned earlier on that in the first video I said I was going to get this done in 2. It turned out that I made it all the way to the back, to the tail feathers. Got the basic shapes down. The head is fairly much done at the end of this video, and I haven't went back and touched the beak up of it, and then I've got a little more work to do on the feathers on the back. And last but not least, a little contour work on the bottom. This is kind of interesting here. It's hard to see what's going on. I've got a ball diamond bit in there, and I'm kind of contouring. And again, if you look at it, pay real close attention, I'm kind of setting a feather pattern there as I come down, taking off those high spots. This gives the burning pin and the stone that I come back with later a little guide to follow, and gives the correct bumps and that sort of thing that you'd see in the feather. You can see how I'm using those contour lines that I drew in, even though the ones on the bottom and the center there are not readable. I'm not trying to take the lines away. They don't concern me. I'm just trying to get there. There's jumping quite a bit ahead where I've no burning's done on that except for around the beak there. That's just the stoning, and one half of the head and the feathers are stuck in there. So I've done a little bit more shaping on the front of the body. I haven't really come to the back of it there yet. The back of these loons have a concave shape as they sit out there on the water. Most people don't get an opportunity to see a loon up close and personal. They are not a hunted species, and they tend to dive even if you're 20 or 30 foot away from them in a canoe. So all you're seeing is a silhouette, and they've got the little flat spot where their wings are folded up on the back, and that's kind of what I'm putting in there. And I'm doing it in small sections. I could do this with a power carver. I kind of use a little bit of both, if you notice. It's easier a lot of times to use a chisel to remove wood rapidly. I could finish this all by hand, but I'd have to sit up for that. There you can kind of see the contour I'm talking about in that older loon that I saved there. And you can see also that this one's a little bit shorter than that one. I went ahead and drew in the reference lines for the feathers. These are not anatomically correct per se. They're close, but not quite the same. There's a little feather ledge that sticks out below the folded portion of the wings there, and then the tail. And you can see I have not shaped the back of that loon. The front is close. There's carving down that first portion where the wing comes in. I will come around later on, and I noticed at the end of the video I hadn't done it yet. At the bottom of that loon there is a ledge where the black, if you look halfway between my thumb and my forefinger, about an inch along the bottom of that loon is going to be carved back in. A little more demonstration of how I figure out what the heck I'm doing. I'm drawing contour lines. I'm going to come back, and this doesn't get a lot of burning on the feathers on the back. I might come back and put a few highlights in, but by and large this is all done with a stone. When you go ahead and paint it, the stone it leaves a really nice feather look in there that you can almost see it in the shadows on the face there. Like I said, there's no burning in there. The burning you see is from the tip of that ceramic stone. If you're in Germany and you're watching this, this is a pack that many years ago, and I'll date it because they were paid for in marks. They haven't used marks for many years, but probably 10 marks for a package of 20. I love those things. I don't know what they were used for, and I'm down to my last 3 or 4. So I don't like a lot of the white ceramic stuff you can buy nowadays. It doesn't seem to do what this does. You can see it's got a little cone shape, and I go ahead and sharpen them. This is speeded up 4 times. So I'm fairly fast with this, but you can see I'm working in a feather flow pattern on that. And I'll just continue to go over that until it gets to what I want. There's the end result of doing all that feather texturing. I'm going to come back with a diamond ball or flame on this and put some feather edgings in there, and that's what I'm drawing in now, and they're rough. Really difficult to read on the Loon because he gets a lot of white spots and speckles all over him. So there I am, coming back with that flame. Probably my favorite bit ever. You can get pretty aggressive with it, or as the case here, I'm just skimming across. And I use the texture. The hold on this thing is feather light, like a pencil in your hand. You can see how it can get pretty aggressive. I'm using it to cut the feather tips there where the wings are folded back in. Again, there is no reference for this. Here's a secondary ledge that sits back on the wing tip there on the Loons. Again, not anatomically correct, but that reads really well for this style of decorative. There's a yellow cuts-all cutting the ledge on the bottom of that. If I really wanted precision on this, I would switch out that medium, the yellow cuts-all, for a diamond bit, and then I would go ahead and burn a line in there, and that line would serve as a stop cut for the tip of that diamond and give me quite a bit of precision. But this doesn't require the precision. Here I'm removing larger sections of wood and relieving the feathers. That's my old handpiece, about 20 years old. The claim on it is 30,000 RPM. The blue one that I use, the newer one, 20 years newer, same company and everything. There's the blue one right there, and they say 40,000 on that one. I tend to run the bigger bits in the blue one, and it does have a safety in it. If you get to grinding too hard, it will overheat and shut itself down, and that just tells you that you've got a little too aggressive with what you're doing. Here's the tail feathers, rough outline going in. You can see the end of the winglets there, and again, there's no burning up there in that left-hand portion. When it gets in focus there, you can see where I left, where the stoning did the feathers. The beauty of that PGL system is mine that I use, I think it's the Ultima 2, and it has a combination burner unit on the left-hand side and the micro handpiece on the right-hand side. And I have two of them, so I have two pens set up. You'll see two different kinds. One has a green foam pad on it, the other has a red. The red is the heavier duty. They don't get quite as hot in your hand, so you can run them a little bit hotter. I tend to run them around 6. The gentleman who runs PGL Enterprises, he will put new tips in those for you for $5 or $6, I don't remember, per pen. About once every year or 2 years, I end up sending him about 5 pens. And he's a one-man operation as far as I know. You eventually can call him on the phone because you won't see your tips for 2 or 3 months thinking they should be there. And he'll say, oh yeah, I was just finishing those up. And then he explains to you how badly you're abusing his pen tips. And I find it kind of interesting, and I go along with it. You're not supposed to sharpen or hone those tips. I do. When he gets them back, at some point in their lifetime, I get probably 2 or 3 years out of a pen using them. I can't even guesstimate the hours. It's got to be 300 or 400 hours in each pen, I would imagine. And like I said, when they're not putting the profile out I want, I'll go ahead and either hone the tip a little bit or sharpen them. He puts them under a microscope, and then while you got him on the phone, you got him on the phone trying to convince him to send your tips back, he analyzes it for you and tells you that you sharpened them, and that's a definite no-no, and that's why they're dying on you. I just kind of grin and bear it, and I continue to sharpen them and use them as I want. At some point, they do die and either burn through because they're just a piece of wire basically that's flattened. You'll see some folks make their own. They get the nickel wire and put them in a burner for 6 or 7. Initial pan's probably $20, and then for $6 or $7, he'll put a new tip in there for you, solder it in, epoxy it in, the whole 9 yards. And I've only had one pen, I think, that actually broke the back portion. Takes a stereo mono jack as a plug-in. Here you see this would be what I would call an initial burning. You can see I've come through with the ceramic stone and used it to define kind of where the feather barbs are laying. I burn real heavy in the pocket, and this is just out. You saw me outline in there to get that edge, because when I start to burn over the edge, the feather will thin out there on the end. These could be faster. This one has quite a bit of burning in it. I left a lot of the stuff in there. You guys have been commenting, several of you, that I move too fast. I claim to be teaching. This is kind of a monkey see, monkey do method that on these latest videos. And some of the beginner videos, if you go back, I'll take a little bit more time and explain what I'm doing. When you're listening to those, take what I say with a grain of salt. I use what works for me. May not necessarily be the correct way, and it may not work for you. Part of the fun of this is doing your own thing. You can see, if you look at that real carefully, I'm kind of rolling the tip over on that. I don't burn a straight line. I don't attempt to burn a straight line, and I'll pick it up and pull it down. If I'm doing a competition one, I'm really concerned about which way the lines are going and how I'm going to paint it. Now, if you're going to paint this and has several colors on it, the straighter and smoother you can burn, the better off you are, because it's really difficult to paint over humps and make a line appear straight. Did that make sense? There you go. There's the, if this thing will focus, it's fun when you're holding this up. A lot of this gets edited out, and it'll focus, and then it won't focus. That's a Canon 70D that I use to do the photographing, and so far it does really well for me. Here's a little longer version. You can see where I burnt in some breaks in the feather there. Makes it look a little more realistic, because a feather will break in the middle of the barbs, and one will kind of go over the other side of it. If you pick up a feather out of the yard and look at it, and give you an idea on how to burn that. This one's probably only going to get burned once, maybe twice. If you later on in the video, I'll show you drake I did, and I might probably burn 3 or 4 times over these feathers to get what I wanted it to do. There's the tail going down up into there with those feather barbs broken. You can see I am burning pretty hot. Another thing you can't see is I don't use a fan on that, but occasionally that smoke that's coming up, I just kind of gently blow that out of the way, and you can see some of that going on there. That's me just blowing very lightly when it starts to come in the wrong direction. I find this to be pretty relaxing. I can do this for 3 or 4 hours. It's fun to see it develop. This is the stage where it really starts to look like a bird. I do tend to work in halves on most of the decoys, and I treat it like the old carousel carvers did. On a carousel horse, if you look at it, the outside was called the romance side, and they really embellished the carving on that. That's the side that everybody sees when it's going around. And in England, they go backwards, just like driving on the wrong damn side of the road. And then in America, the carousels in the early part went the other direction. How that developed, I don't know. They seem to be. And I tend to carve decoys with their heads to the left-hand side, which doesn't help your designer scheme if you're trying to, if you want it facing, the head facing to the right. So the back side of my carvings with the head facing the left side will have a little less detail on them, kind of like the carousel animals. A lot of those, they're just blocked on the back side. Very little detail at all. This is in real time, in keeping with some of you wanting to see a little bit more detail. You can see up there on the top of the wing above the secondary burn ledge, I did burn in a few divots or references where the feathers on the back folded over start to break. I am tilting this pen left and right and rolling it a little bit as I burn in some cases. Just kind of stay with a flow of where I think that feather ought to go before it goes down into the next one. I do tend to burn from the exposed feather. If you look at the tip of on the top of the tail, there's going to be one feather that's showing. The rest of the feathers are going to be in the center. The rest of the feathers are going to be stuck underneath that one, and therefore you're not going to get the feather barb showing. Or if you do, the feather barb will just be on the tip of that feather that's sticking out. This is one of those heavy duty pens, so they say. I don't notice a whole lot of difference between the two of the pens. I buy them at random. I tend to stick with 3 or 4 shapes. I think I have 5 pens that I'm running. And at least one and a backup. So I think right now, out of probably 10 pens that I'm running, I've got 1 or 2 that are not serviceable. So there's the initial burn. You can see kind of where I'm talking about when I'm rolling over. If I'd hold that still. I then come in with a little brass brush, and it takes a little bit of the carbon off. And you can see that dark going away, and it comes a light mellow brown. Now, if that sits for a day, that thing will mellow quite a bit. If I were to put this on the shelf and come back, that dark brown would be gone, and it would be all relatively the same color, the oxidization. Now, at some point, I'll come back in and clean up where I was, and I could make these lines. I could put 3 or 4 more lines in there. I haven't went ahead and worked on the bottom underneath the tail feathers yet, but you can kind of see where it's going there. I hope this is showing you guys where you can go with this. There's a side that's just been contoured roughly on the feathers, get the shape going where they belong, and then I came back in with that ceramic stone. I do have a few diamond stones that I can use to contour, but I just don't like them as well. So as you can see, that's about where I made it. I did burn both sides of the tail on this one, and I thought the video was getting a little long. It was long in the 20-25 minute range. I think 20 minutes is probably too long. 10 minutes is too short, and 30 minutes is definitely too long, unless you want to do it. Okay, hey, here's a new section that we're going to give a try, and it's giving a shout out to Stinnett Sticks. Take a look at his website. He's doing some great stuff over there. I think we should be like A-Bomb and Click Spring and this old Tony and those kind of guys. Here's Decoy, if you want to check that video out. But anyway, so a bunch of us carvers, we need to get our act together and share what's out there with some of these other folks. So if you get a chance, take a look at Gene Messer down in the description. You also got Doug Linker down there, and of course Stinnett Sticks. Hey, thanks a lot. This is Ben with Studio on the Lake. Check those guys out. I think you'll really like it. Thanks for watching.